It started subtly, didn't it? The way they said your name, your cousin, once filled with shared memories, old jokes, and innocent love. But one day, the tone changed. Not loud enough for others to notice, but heaven did. God saw the shift, not in the volume, but in the vibration. Your name became heavy on their tongue, not from admiration, from envy. And you felt it, didn't you? That strange stillness when you walked into the room. The delayed eye contact. The smiles that didn't quite reach their spirit. It wasn't always this way. You two were like siblings, intertwined by blood and secrets. But your glow started to disturb their shadows. Your evolution started unsettling what they never healed in themselves. And what began as silent comparison fermented into a dark seed of resentment, until the name they once praised became a target on your back. Chosen one, God wants you to know, your cousin didn't just grow jealous of your blessings. They became obsessed with the source of them, the peace that followed you, the breakthroughs that unfolded for you, the light that refused to dim. It wasn't what you had that bothered them most. It was who you were becoming without asking their permission. And so, while you slept, they began speaking words about you into the dark, whispering doubts into rooms you hadn't even entered yet, casting spiritual shade through conversation, until your name wasn't just mispronounced, it was misused. They didn't realize that every careless curse they spoke was being recorded by heaven, that every twisted tale they told was being weighed against your true assignment. They thought they were waging gossip, but they were initiating warfare. You weren't paranoid. That feeling in your stomach was real. The chills during phone calls, the drain after visits, the strange heaviness after reading certain texts. It was your spirit being warned before your mind caught up. God had already sent protection before you even knew you needed it. Angels stood at the edge of conversations you were never invited to, silencing certain words before they could manifest. That's why the worst didn't happen. That's why the trap didn't work. Because your destiny is not up for negotiation, and no cousin, no matter how close in blood, can cancel what heaven has authored. And yet, you still love them. That's the hardest part, isn't it? You would have shared your miracles. You would have brought them along. But jealousy doesn't want to ride beside you. It wants to replace you. And when it couldn't do that, it tried to sabotage the route. But what they didn't know is this: God built you for ambushes. You've been surviving behind the back battles your whole life. This wasn't new. It was just the first time you recognized it for what it was, a generational echo. And now the healing begins. But so does the war, because heaven just circled your name, and the shift is official. You always thought their smile was safe, familiar. It reminded you of childhood birthdays, old music playing in the background, and late-night talks where everything felt simple. But the older you got, the more their grin felt staged, like it was waiting for applause that never came, like it knew something you didn't. That smile didn't soften with your successes. It stiffened, like your blessings betrayed them somehow. But here's what heaven needs you to understand, chosen one. Some people smile not because they're happy for you, but because they're hiding the spell they've already spoken. And your cousin was smiling like that. It wasn't witchcraft in the cinematic sense. There were no potions or candles. The spell came through repetition, through the quiet power of spoken bitterness. Every time they smiled at you and then said they think they're better, it cast a shadow. Every time they mentioned your name with a smirk, they layered the air with resentment. Spiritual spells are like algorithms. The more they're repeated, the more real they become. And for months, even years, they fed this unseen script, replaying old wounds, recasting you in their mental drama as the villain. And the worst part, you kept hugging them. You kept showing up. You kept defending them in rooms they wouldn't protect you in. But now, heaven is exposing what's been hidden behind the performance. You weren't wrong for feeling drained. That wasn't love you were standing next to. it was competition wearing a mask. Every compliment they gave you came with spiritual recoil. They couldn't understand how your life still bloomed after the things that were supposed to break you. And when they couldn't figure it out, they turned to spiritual sabotage, not rituals, words. They don't deserve that. They got lucky. Watch, it won't last. That's the spell, spoken with certainty, aimed at your foundation. But what they didn't realize is, your roots weren't planted in ego. Your growth came from pain, from obedience, from divine favor, the kind that can't be explained, only revealed. And chosen one, the revealing has begun. God is pulling masks off in this season. Your spiritual eyesight is being sharpened. That's why the same smile that used to comfort you now makes you pause. You're not imagining things. You're finally seeing things. The vibration behind the voice, the weight behind the word, the coldness behind the cheer. You've stepped into discernment, and that's a spiritual threat to those who relied on your blindness. But don't harden. Don't let bitterness make a home in you. You're not called to curse them back. You're called to rise beyond the spell. Because when the smile fades, and the masks drop, and the silence breaks, your light will still be shining. Untouched, unbroken, unbound. There was a time when their laughter wrapped around you like a shared secret, warm, real, rooted in childhood. But lately, that laughter started to echo differently. It didn't land the same. You'd walk into the room and they'd stop mid-sentence. Eyes darted, smiles paused. And if the laughter continued, it felt sharp, not the kind that includes, the kind that isolates, and you felt it, chosen one. That ache in your spirit wasn't insecurity, it was intuition. Laughter carries energy, and theirs had started shifting from unity to division. What was once familiar now felt like mockery, whispered through teeth that used to speak your name in love. You weren't paranoid, you were being spiritually warned. The truth is, your elevation started to make people uncomfortable who were never honest about their own stagnation. And rather than rise with you, your cousins sat in circles where jokes about you became currency. They laughed not because you were funny, but because it distracted them from their own unrealized calling. Your growth became a punchline, and the more you rose, the more your name was dragged, behind smiles, behind sarcasm, behind family dinners where it was just a joke turned into spiritual warfare. But God was in the room too, and heaven doesn't laugh when the anointed are mocked. Chosen one, let this be clear. They didn't hate you. They hated what your life reminded them was possible. Your peace exposed their inner chaos. Your resilience triggered their avoidance. You didn't ask for that role, but heaven assigned it. You were meant to be a mirror, and sometimes when people look into a mirror and don't like what they see, they try to shatter the reflection instead of changing themselves. But what they didn't realize is, your reflection wasn't fragile. It was forged, in silence, in struggle, in prayer. That's why the laughter bounced off you like arrows off armor. You've been confused, heartbroken even, wondering how family could misread you this badly. But betrayal never shows up in the enemy. It always hides in someone close enough to wound. And God allowed you to hear those giggles behind closed doors for a reason. Not to hurt you, but to reveal them. Because in this next season of your assignment, clarity is protection. And what they used to call harmless teasing, God calls defamation. You were never the joke, you were the warning. Let them laugh. Let the room shake with the sound of their bitterness in disguise. Heaven isn't laughing. Heaven is preparing. For the day they'll need your voice, your prayer, your mercy. And when that day comes, you'll be too far in your purpose to seek revenge, but close enough to forgive them anyway. This didn't begin with you. That's the first thing heaven needs you to understand. Your cousin's jealousy wasn't born the moment you succeeded. It was inherited, passed down like furniture no one wanted to claim, wrapped in bitterness and denial. You stepped into a bloodline already at war with itself. Silent rivalries, unspoken resentments, a long line of chosen souls who were either silenced or sabotaged before they could rise. And you, chosen one, you were the first in generations to awaken fully, to see it, to name it, to stand in the middle of it all and say, "This ends with me." But peace doesn't arrive without resistance, and the moment you claimed healing, the battle began. Heaven doesn't see families the way humans do, last names and shared faces. Heaven sees patterns, frequencies, echoes. In your family line, a recurring theme has played out. One child always marked, always different, always isolated. You were born with that mark, sensitive, bright, full of potential, and questions no one knew how to answer. You thought it made you strange, but it made you sovereign. You carried light that exposed every secret the bloodline tried to bury, and not everyone was ready for that kind of truth. Your cousin wasn't the enemy, not at first. They were collateral, another soul born into a lineage of comparison and competition. They were taught to measure love by attention, to view your wins as their losses. And when you started breaking cycles, refusing silence, healing your inner world, praying over your name, something in the bloodline felt threatened. Not because you were wrong, but because you were new, different, dangerous to the dysfunction they'd all silently agreed to uphold. You didn't just shift your life, you tilted the axis of the entire ancestral structure. And when old spirits of envy and pride couldn't reach you directly, they moved through the ones closest to you, including them. Chosen one, you're not imagining this war. It's spiritual, ancestral, generational. But here's what heaven needs you to hear clearly. You were not born into this family to suffer. You were born into it to cleanse. Your presence is an interruption to every curse that called your lineage home. Your healing is the answer to prayers your great-grandmother cried in secret. You are not alone in this. The unseen ones, the ones who tried to break the pattern but didn't make it, they're with you, watching, rejoicing, guiding. This is more than a chapter about jealousy. It's a record of a bloodline being rewritten. And your cousin? They may not understand it now, but the same light they tried to sabotage will one day be the light that saves them. Until then, stay covered, stay clear, stay chosen. Because what heaven sees isn't a feud, it's a generational shift, and you're leading it.
You remember it vividly, don't you? That dream you had when you were young, the one that woke you up in a sweat, heart racing, unsure if it was real. You told someone once, maybe your cousin, maybe your parent, and they laughed it off, said it was nothing, said you were just a creative kid. But something about it never left you. It wasn't just a dream. It was a visitation, a glimpse into the battle you were born into. And heaven wants you to know now, it wasn't your imagination. It was prophecy. In that dream, maybe you were being chased, or standing alone while shadows whispered your name. Or maybe you saw something crumble, a house, a face, a symbol. You couldn't explain it back then, but your spirit knew, because that dream marked the moment your gifts started waking up, long before jealousy ever found your cousin's heart, long before the family tension got loud. That dream was your initiation, a spiritual alert, not to scare you, but to remind you who you are, what you carry, and what you would be called to protect. Chosen one, the enemy didn't wait until you were an adult to recognize you. Darkness spotted your glow early. That's why the dreams began so young. That's why your childhood had so many moments of unexplained sadness, unprovoked fear, or feeling like no one understood you. The dream was never just a message, it was a memory, a part of your soul remembering where it came from.
Heaven had to break through the veil before the world convinced you to forget. And though others dismissed it, that vision has been echoing ever since, quietly guiding you, quietly preparing you. Your cousin? They had dreams too, but they ignored them, shut them down, repressed what they couldn't control. And when your spiritual awakening began to bloom into reality, it triggered the very parts of them they tried to bury. They didn't understand why you remembered what they tried to forget, why the light followed you, why the dream still lingered in your eyes. But you never bragged. You never used your gift as a weapon. You just kept walking, confused maybe, but obedient. Until one day, the dream returned, not in sleep, in real life. The moment your cousin turned cold, the moment the laughter faded, the moment you sensed danger but couldn't explain it. That was the dream manifesting, not as fear, but as a signal. It's time. It's time to return to what you saw, to trust what you felt, to believe that your childhood wasn't marked by random visions, but divine warning. The ones who mocked you for dreaming didn't know they were laughing at prophecy. And the places in your past that still hurt, they're just proof that you've been walking between worlds your whole life. You weren't crazy, you were being called, and now the dream is waking up again, because your purpose is about to be undeniable. You remember the day they handed it to you. Soft smile, steady hands, saying it was just a little something. A necklace, simple, pretty, maybe even sentimental. You thanked them without hesitation. Why would you question it? It came from family. But something inside you paused, didn't it? That quiet tug in your gut, that brief flicker of unease. You brushed it off, told yourself you were being silly. But chosen one, heaven wants you to revisit that moment, because what you received that day wasn't a gift. It was a spiritual tether, a disguised agreement, and it was never meant to bless you. Objects can carry intention, and that necklace, though physical, was spiritually coded. Your cousin didn't hand it to you out of love, they handed it to you out of desperation. At the time, your light had grown too strong to ignore. Your peace had become unbearable to their restless soul. So they wrapped their jealousy in a gesture, hoping to attach something unseen to your spirit. It wasn't a curse in the traditional sense. It was a subtle cord, meant to siphon, meant to cling, meant to blur your clarity and weigh down your movement. And you felt it, that heaviness when you wore it, that strange wave of sadness that came later, the nightmares that picked up again, the feeling of being watched when you were alone. That wasn't coincidence. That was contact. Chosen one, this is not to make you afraid. This is to make you aware. Spiritual warfare doesn't always announce itself with fire and thunder. Sometimes it smiles. Sometimes it hugs you. Sometimes it says, "Here, this made me think of you," and waits for you to say thank you. But heaven was watching. And what your cousin tried to attach to you was intercepted before it could take root. That's why the worst never happened. That's why your soul never cracked. The angels assigned to you went into motion the moment the clasp was fastened. You didn't know it then, but your spirit was already being defended, and yet you still kept it, because you didn't want to seem ungrateful, because you believed their intentions were pure, because family shouldn't hurt you like this, right? But chosen one, obedience is more powerful than sentiment, and God is calling you to release what was never meant to stay. The necklace may be gone now, or still tucked in some forgotten drawer, but the agreement it symbolized has already been broken. Your spirit rejected it. Your anointing burned through it. And that's why your cousin's behavior changed after you stopped wearing it, because they felt the disconnection, the failure of the hidden plan. This is your confirmation. That thing you were given, it wasn't for your protection, it was a projection. But no object formed against you shall prosper, not while heaven guards your frequency,
not while angels stand between your skin and every secret spell. You are untouchable now, and they know it.
There are things you were never meant to see, pages meant to stay private, thoughts hidden in ink behind locked drawers. But heaven saw them, every word, every line, every sentence your cousin wrote when no one was watching. They claimed it was for clarity, for venting, for processing emotion. But the truth is, their journal wasn't just a diary. It became an altar, and the pages turned into spells. Because when jealousy festers without accountability, it becomes a prayer to the wrong forces. And what they wrote about you wasn't innocent, it was intentional. They watched you grow, quietly, uneasily. Your peace became unbearable, your favor looked unfair. And so they started writing things down to make sense of it, or so they told themselves. But what they were really doing was documenting their descent. At first it was subtle, comparisons, frustrations, questions like, why not me? But soon the words darkened. They started assigning motives to your joy, crafting false narratives around your success, turning memories into blame. And each word was a thread in a fabric of quiet war, not with knives, not with fists, but with ink, with vibration, with the sacred act of writing twisted into a spiritual attack. Chosen one, there are entire pages where your name is mentioned not in admiration, but accusation. And heaven heard it all, not to punish them, but to protect you. That's why your spirit started pulling back, even when your mind didn't understand. That's why conversations felt different, why you stopped reaching out as much, why you began feeling spiritually exhausted after seeing them. It was your soul responding to what was written in secret. They were writing in one dimension, but waging war in another, and God needed you to create distance, not out of hate, but out of survival. You might never read those pages. You're not supposed to. This isn't about uncovering evidence. It's about accepting the truth. Their heart was no longer safe with your name in it. And God, in His mercy, blocked those words from manifesting. That's why you were spared. That's why the sabotage didn't land. That's why doors still opened, favor still flowed, light still lingered around you, because what they wrote was limited to the page. But what God spoke over you, eternal, untouchable, sealed. And here's the most important part. You don't need to retaliate. You don't need to prove your side of the story. Heaven already saw the manuscript, already cancelled every word curse, already rewrote the ending. You are not what they journaled about. You are what God has spoken since before birth, called, anointed, radiant, chosen. And their pen cannot cancel that. No matter how many pages they fill, no matter how many lies they scribble in private. They wrote you as the villain to justify their wounds, but heaven wrote you as the warrior, and no ink on earth can erase that. They felt it before you even spoke. You walked in, same smile, same voice, same blood. But something was different now. Your aura had grown, expanded, solidified. It wasn't loud, but it was undeniable. The atmosphere bent slightly when you entered. Conversations shifted, eyes darted. People adjusted their posture without realizing why. And your cousin, the one who once stood beside you as an equal, felt something rise in them they couldn't name. It wasn't hate at first, it was fear. Not of you, but of what your presence was beginning to reveal. Chosen one, you need to understand this. Your energy has always spoken before your mouth ever could. You carry a frequency that's not from this realm, not taught, not learned, not inherited. It's assigned, divine. And when someone is out of alignment with their own spirit, your aura becomes unbearable. That's what happened to them. The same cousin who once laughed with you now couldn't sit next to you without feeling exposed. Your peace triggered their chaos, Your clarity highlighted their confusion. Your glow disrupted the shadows they had grown comfortable in, and instead of growing with you, they chose to recoil, retreat, resist. You wondered why it suddenly felt so awkward, why conversations got clipped, why jokes fell flat, why the air felt thick every time you entered the room. It wasn't your imagination, it was your impact. You don't just walk into spaces, you awaken them. Your very presence reminds spirits that time is running out, that masks are slipping, that hidden motives can't hide in your light. And that's exactly why your cousin began to fumble, to stumble over words, to avoid your gaze. Not because you said something wrong, but because your aura was saying too much without saying anything at all. Heaven has been expanding your field, strengthening your boundaries, sharpening your discernment. And that growth, that spiritual maturity, comes with side effects. You can't be around what's false without feeling the tension now. You can't pretend not to see what you spiritually see. And your cousin, who once knew how to hide behind charm and shared blood, suddenly felt spiritually naked. That's why they began to resent you louder, not because you did something, but because your frequency started revealing things they weren't ready to heal. But here's the holy irony. They needed your aura, your presence, your example. The very thing they were repelled by is the thing heaven intended to heal them. And that's what made it unbearable. Being close to someone who held the answer while they clung to the lie. Chosen one, never shrink to keep the peace. Never dim to be digestible. Never tone down what God has turned up. Your aura is not arrogance. It's alignment. And it's doing exactly what it was designed to do. Shake the room, sift the spirits, and sanctify the space. Let it work. Let it stretch. Let it disturb. You stayed longer than you should have. Not out of weakness, but out of loyalty. You told yourself it was just for a season, just until things settled, just until the tension passed, just until they healed. But heaven had already started whispering, leave, not in anger, in wisdom. Because that house, the one filled with shared memories, blood ties, familiar smells, and dangerous comfort, wasn't safe anymore. The walls knew too much. The rooms held residue. And your spirit, though polite, had already outgrown it. You noticed it, didn't you? The sleep that never came easy, the silence that felt loud, the strange heaviness that sat in the corners like something watching. You thought you were just sensitive, but you weren't being dramatic, you were being spiritually warned. That house, once a refuge, had become a cage. The energy shifted, the shadows stretched longer, conversations became surveillance. You were being studied, not supported, and the longer you stayed, the more your light dimmed. You'd leave the room and feel drained, not physically, spiritually. That wasn't your imagination, that was warfare. That was your cousin trying to keep you in proximity so they could keep their power. Chosen one, understand this. Not every shelter is a sanctuary. Some houses were built on broken agreements, old jealousies, and spiritual debts passed from generation to generation. And when you, the awakened one, entered that space, your presence began to dismantle the unspoken contracts. The air felt it, the walls felt it, and yes, they felt it too. That's why they began moving strange, why they offered less warmth and more control, why gifts felt like bribes, why small talk felt like traps. You were never meant to build there, you were meant to pass through. The enemy wanted to keep you there just long enough to delay your assignment, to bury you in distractions, to make you question your discernment. But heaven kept nudging, whispering through restlessness, dreams, divine frustration, not because you were failing, but because you were finished. That chapter had expired, and staying in expired spaces breeds spiritual infection. That's why God made you uncomfortable. That's why the peace you once had turned into pressure. It wasn't punishment, it was protection in motion. When you left, you felt guilty, maybe even scared, but something inside you exhaled for the first time in months, because your spirit had been cramped, silenced, stifled, and now heaven is restoring you. You were never meant to stay in a place where your glow made others flinch, where your joy made others plot, where your cousin watched you not with love, but with calculation. That house was not your home, it was your test.
They looked at you every day but never truly saw you. Your cousin, the others, the ones who stood close enough to touch your shoulder but couldn't perceive your purpose. They thought you were just quiet, just kind, just different. But you weren't just anything. You were hidden, not overlooked, concealed, because heaven had to protect what was sacred until the time was right. And that's what they never understood. While they were busy trying to outshine you, God was hiding the crown you didn't even know you were wearing. Chosen one, sometimes protection looks like invisibility. Sometimes the blessing is not being noticed. God blurred their vision for a reason. Because if they had known what you carried, the anointing, the favor, the fire, they would have tried to kill it before it could bloom. That's what jealousy does. It doesn't wait for success. It tries to choke the seed. But God is strategic. He covered your shine with silence. He let them misread you on purpose. While they thought you were lost, heaven was training you in secret. While they gossiped about your delay, angels were guarding your timeline. You weren't behind. You were hidden on holy assignment. Your cousin mistook your humility for weakness. They thought your silence was submission, but God was watching. He let them overlook you so they wouldn't try to intercept what was never theirs. They mocked what they didn't recognize. And when your light finally began to break through, they were confused because they thought they knew you, but they only knew the version God allowed them to see. The rest was reserved, sanctified, protected. That's why certain conversations never included you. Why certain opportunities passed you by. Why some rooms never opened. Not because you weren't worthy, but because God refused to let your destiny be negotiated in spaces too small to hold it. Your cousin tried to explain you to others, boxed you into their own projections, told stories that kept you beneath them. But heaven never needed their endorsement. God's plan didn't require their permission. And now, the unveiling has begun. They're starting to see it, aren't they? The power in your voice, the favor on your name, the light that wasn't there before. Or maybe it always was, and they just weren't allowed to see it. And the ones who misread you, who tried to bind you with their own limits, they're left speechless, because the very person they once pitied is now walking in divine clarity, unbothered, unreachable, unhidden. Chosen one, God hid you for your protection, but now He's revealing you for His glory, not as revenge, as testimony. What they tried to overlook will soon be the thing they can't ignore. You were never behind. You were never invisible. You were just becoming. And now you're here, and heaven is no longer keeping you secret. It wasn't loud. It wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't even fully confident. But heaven heard it. That quiet prayer you whispered, half in faith, half in desperation. The one you said when no one was around. No music, no ceremony, just you, broken and bold enough to say, God, I can't do this alone. If they've been cursing me in secret, if they've been holding something against me, break it. And with that simple, trembling plea, the atmosphere shifted. Because, chosen one, your prayer didn't just reach God, it commanded angels. What your cousin tried to bind with jealousy, heaven unfastened with mercy. That single moment of surrender was all God needed to unleash what had been held back. You thought you were just praying for peace, but in the spirit, you were declaring war, breaking agreements you didn't sign, shattering contracts your ancestors accepted without knowing the cost. You weren't just protecting yourself,
you were uprooting generations of silence. And when you said Amen, 1,000 chains cracked in dimensions you couldn't see. The weight that lifted, that wasn't emotional relief, that was spiritual release. The headaches, the fatigue, the lingering fog, they weren't random. They were evidence of unseen ropes being pulled tight around your destiny. But that prayer snapped them, not because you knew exactly what you were doing, but because your heart was aligned with heaven's intention. You don't need fancy words when you have righteous desperation. And yours was holy. Yours was enough. Your cousin felt it too. They couldn't explain it, but something in their grip on you started slipping. The way they used to influence rooms with just a comment about you. Gone. The favor they tried to block from your life, flowing again. The tightness in your chest whenever you saw their name, loosened. Because spiritual warfare may be invisible, but spiritual victory is unmistakable. And you won. Chosen one, you broke something ancient. And the enemy is furious, not because you yelled, but because you believed. You dared to ask God to intervene, and God did. Now the atmosphere is clearing. The air is lighter. Your thoughts are sharper. Your body is recovering. That's the fruit of spiritual breakthrough. That's the evidence of chains undone. That's what freedom feels like, even when nothing in the physical has changed yet. Inside, the locks have turned. Don't let anyone convince you that small prayers don't matter, that a whisper in the dark can't tear down what has stood for decades. You're living proof. You opened your mouth, and heaven answered with thunder. That's what happens when chosen ones pray. You don't just speak to God, you activate realms. So if you ever doubt your authority, remember this. Your cousin had plans. Darkness had designs. But your one prayer, fragile, honest, raw, burned through every layer of it. You didn't just break the chain, you ended the pattern. It's tucked away somewhere. Bottom drawer, locked box, old closet, no one touches. A photo album, nothing fancy. Just pages of moments frozen in time, smiles, birthdays, holidays. But it's what's not shown that speaks loudest. Because there are pictures missing, whole stretches of memory erased, and the ones that remain, curated, cropped. Your cousin always controlled the narrative, even through photographs, but heaven saw what they cut out. And now, the truth is surfacing. Chosen one, they've been shaping the family story for years, playing the role, positioning themselves as the favorite, the martyr, the misunderstood. And to make that role believable, they had to remove you, or at least reduce you. That's why your victories were never posted. That's why your light never made it to their curated memories. Not because you weren't there, but because your presence disrupted the image they were trying to protect. They wanted to be the center, so they pushed you to the edge, then out of frame. But the Spirit doesn't forget what the eyes aren't allowed to see. God remembers every smile you offered that went undocumented, every kindness that was never captured, every moment they tried to erase, heaven preserved. You were never missing. You were hidden again, not by accident, but by divine design. Because what they keep in that photo album isn't the truth. It's the version of the past that keeps their story intact. And now that your light is undeniable, the cracks in their story are beginning to show. They don't want people to see the full timeline, because if they did, they'd start asking questions. Like why you were left out of family milestones, why the same cousin who claims to love you has no record of your growth, no photos, no posts, no mentions. It's not forgetfulness, it's strategy, erasure as control, silence as protection, for them, not for you. But God is lifting the veil, and what was hidden in their house, in their journals, in their photo albums, is being exposed by the Spirit. Not to shame them, but to free you, because you've been wondering if you imagined the rejection, if maybe you were too sensitive, But now you know. It was deliberate, and even in the quiet, they were trying to make you small, to reduce your divine story to a side note in their own. But heaven is your historian, and every scene they omitted, God is restoring with glory. You don't need their photos to validate your place. You were never meant to be framed in their version of the story. You were meant to outgrow it. Your legacy isn't in the albums they keep hidden. It's in the transformation they can't explain. The glow that won't dim. The timeline they can't edit. Chosen one, you are the memory they didn't want to keep because they knew it would convict them. And now, you're unforgettable. You remember that night, the one you never fully talked about. You brushed it off the next morning, told yourself it was just a dream, just a flicker in the dark, just a trick of the light. But you knew, deep in your body, that wasn't your imagination. That was something, a presence, a weight, a watching. And now, chosen one, heaven confirms what your spirit already suspected. That shadow that stood at the edge of your bed, that cold that fell across your chest, that whisper that didn't use words. It was real. Not everything that visits you is from God, and not everything that leaves quietly does so without trying to leave something behind. That night was a test, not of your strength, but of your awareness. Your cousin had already spoken the curse. They didn't call it that, of course. They just said things like, "I hope they fail. They're not who they think they are. Watch what happens next." Words soaked in envy, marinated in spiritual frustration. And what they didn't realize is that those words had power, not because you were weak, but because you were close to breakthrough. That shadow wasn't just random, it was a sent spirit, an echo of all the silent rage your cousin had been holding, but couldn't say to your face. And when physical schemes failed, the spiritual ones escalated. That's how warfare works. It starts with whispers, then moves into rooms while you're asleep. But here's the part they didn't anticipate. You were protected. Even in your most vulnerable moment, even in the dark, even when your body froze and your heart raced and you couldn't speak, heaven was already standing between you and that thing. The shadow couldn't touch you. It could only observe and leave, defeated. Chosen one, don't let the world convince you that the spiritual realm isn't real. You've lived in it your whole life. You feel things before they happen. You sense shifts in rooms others call vibes. You have dreams that reveal too much, and when you speak, the atmosphere bends. That's not intuition, that's assignment, that's power. That's why they sense something, because your light disturbs what has settled in darkness for too long. You didn't imagine it. That chill wasn't random. That fear wasn't weakness. That shadow was confirmation that someone, somewhere, saw your rise and tried to block it with intimidation. But here you are, awake, whole, wiser, covered, and now that door is closed. That portal is sealed. That shadow won't return because it knows now what the enemy hoped you'd never figure out. You saw it and you survived. They sent a warning, but God sent a wall. And your silence that night, it wasn't fear. You didn't see them with your eyes, but your soul noticed. The hallway that once felt eerie after dark started humming with something different. It wasn't silence anymore. It was presence, not human, not threatening, holy. It began the moment you stopped tolerating the strange tension in that house, when you started praying over your doorframe, when you whispered, "God, cover this room," without anyone hearing. That was the shift, and heaven responded immediately. The moment you aligned, the moment you stopped excusing the unease, angels moved in. Chosen one, understand this. Your prayer didn't just bring comfort, it summoned authority. You didn't just reclaim your room, you redrew the boundaries of the battlefield, and heaven dispatched warriors to your location, not poetic ones, real ones, and they didn't hover for show, they stood guard. because God knew what your cousin was still trying to project: the whispers, the sideways glances, the conversations laced with manipulation. But none of it could cross the threshold anymore. The hallway became sacred. The air shifted. What once prowled with permission now trembled under protection. Your cousin noticed it too. They may not have language for it, but they felt it. That strange cold that met them when they tried to stand outside your door too long. That unseen resistance that made them turn around instead of walk in uninvited. Angels were stationed there, not because you asked for battle, but because you claimed peace. And peace to heaven is worth defending. Your light became territory, and that territory is now armed. Remember that one night you heard something, footsteps that didn't match the weight, breathing outside your door when no one was there? That wasn't imagination. That was attempted trespass. But the angels didn't flinch. They stood like fire between you and every curse, every projection, every spiritual tracking device your cousin had hoped would pierce through. It didn't, not even close. Because Chosen One, your obedience activated layers of protection you didn't even know existed. Angels don't show up where fear reigns. They show up where faith makes room. And your simple prayers, your refusal to shrink, your decision to stop letting unease be normal, that's what summoned them. You didn't need a ritual, you just needed truth. And the moment you stood in it, heaven stood with you. So now, when you walk through that hallway, know this: you're not alone. You never were. What once felt like a trap is now a throne room. What once echoed with darkness now glows with guardianship. Your cousin may still be trying things in secret, but it doesn't matter. God's sentinels aren't moving. Not until your next assignment is secure. Let them try. Let them wonder. Let them feel that invisible wall when they try to come close again. Because heaven has made it clear, no unclean spirit shall pass. You didn't mean to activate it. You were just being yourself, healing, praying, growing, glowing. You didn't even know that your energy could disturb things that lived long before you were born. But that's exactly what happened. Chosen One, your presence didn't just bother your cousin. It woke up an ancient resistance buried deep in your bloodline. Something that had survived through silence, secrecy, and shame. But then you arrived, and without even trying, you broke the pattern wide open. They called it bad luck, said it ran in the family. The sudden losses, the broken relationships, the sabotaged opportunities. But it wasn't coincidence. It was a contract, something spoken or unspoken generations ago. A curse that attached itself to the bloodline like rot in the foundation. But it needed agreement to keep surviving. It needed fear. It needed repetition. And then you came along, carrying light, speaking truth, refusing to bow. And the curse felt it. The moment you chose to love yourself, the moment you chose God over gossip, the moment you stopped apologizing for your gifts, that's when the curse cracked. And your cousin? They felt it too. Not consciously, but spiritually. That's why they turned on you. It wasn't just envy, it was spiritual panic. Your energy wasn't just bright, it was disruptive. And for those who benefit from the cycle staying broken, your healing felt like betrayal. Your obedience felt like a threat, because your breakthrough meant the curse was losing ground, and that terrified the spirit that had made your family its home. Chosen One, this is what no one tells you about healing. It provokes, it interrupts, it exposes. And that's why it's lonely, because you're not just breaking patterns. You're breaking agreements made by people who thought survival was the same as peace. But you weren't called to survive. You were called to restore, to walk into the rubble and plant something holy, to live in a way that makes curses confused. That's what your cousin couldn't explain. Why being around you made them restless, why their words got sharper, why their attempts to sabotage kept backfiring. It wasn't personal, it was ancestral. You were never cursed. You were born to confront the curse. You're not bound by what haunted them. You're here to send it back, and you've already started. Every prayer, every boundary, every act of kindness in the face of betrayal, every time you chose forgiveness without re-entry, all of it sent shockwaves through a system that thought you'd fold like the ones before you. But you didn't. You stayed, you faced it, and heaven smiled. Because someone had to do it. Someone had to confront the chain, not with fear, but with fire.
It wasn't just a random wake-up. You know the one, 3:33 a.m., eyes open wide, heart beating like something unseen just brushed your soul. You looked around. No noise, no movement, just that feeling. Like the veil between here and heaven had gone thin. Like something, or someone, was trying to reach you. And they were. Chosen one, that wasn't insomnia. That was intervention. Because when heaven needs to speak without interruption, it chooses the hours when everything else sleeps. You weren't being haunted. You were being visited, and not by darkness, by light. An angel stood at the edge of your bed, not with wings or drama, but with instruction. You didn't hear words, but your spirit understood. This was the shift, the moment the battle reached its turning point. Your cousin's jealousy had stirred something real. The spiritual attacks had intensified, but so had your authority, and God in His mercy didn't wait until morning. He woke you up in the middle of the night because the enemy never sleeps, but neither does heaven. That number, 333, it wasn't coincidence. It was code, a reminder of alignment, confirmation, divine presence. Jeremiah 33. 3 echoes it. Call to me, and I will answer you, and tell you great and unsearchable things you do not know. That's what was happening. You were being invited to receive answers your bloodline never dared to ask for. Secrets buried in generational silence. Strategies for warfare beyond human logic. Peace deeper than understanding. At 3:33, heaven wasn't just watching. It was downloading. You may have cried, you may have sat up, confused. You may have prayed something simple like, God, what is this? And even that whisper, that seeking, became a weapon. Because that night, something broke. Not loud, not explosive, but final. The last lingering cord from your cousin's spiritual sabotage was cut. What they tried to monitor was sealed. What they tried to access was blocked. That hallway they once hovered near, guarded. That dream realm they tried to influence, secured. Chosen one, not all battles are fought in daylight. Some victories happen in sweat-soaked silence under moonlight. And you won one that night, not with a sword, with surrender. You didn't need to understand it to receive it. God showed up at your most vulnerable hour and confirmed what your spirit already knew. You are protected. Since that night, you've changed. Your dreams feel clearer. Your mind feels lighter. Your prayers feel sharper. That's not in your head. That's what post-breakthrough feels like. The chains have fallen, the watchers have scattered, and the covering has doubled. So the next time you wake at 3:33, don't panic. Smile. It means heaven still considers you reachable, teachable, trustworthy. It means the war is still over, and the light is still winning. You feel it now, don't you? The shift. The peace that doesn't come from people behaving, but from knowing you're covered, no matter what they do. You've stopped flinching. The air is different. The atmosphere obeys you now, because heaven didn't just defend you, it marked you. You're not walking alone. You're walking under covenant. The kind no relative, no curse, no whispered word can revoke. Chosen one, the war that once surrounded you has been silenced. But you must understand something painful. Not everyone in your family is safe from what tried to take you. Your cousin may look the same, speak the same,
walk the same halls, but something in them has shifted, not in freedom, in frustration. Because everything they tried failed, every spiritual arrow returned void, every plot reversed, and now they're left with the weight of their own intentions echoing in the dark. You don't need revenge, you don't need an apology, you've transcended that. But what you do need is discernment, because the same spirit that operated through them may now seek another door. Curses don't disappear, they look for a new host. Your cousin didn't realize what they opened when they tried to curse what God had chosen. They thought it was just resentment. But bitterness is a portal. And now, unless they repent, unless they cleanse what they allowed in, they'll be tormented by what tried to touch you. That's not your guilt to carry. That's not your job to fix. You offered mercy, you offered grace, you prayed, but you are not the redeemer. You are the survivor. Heaven has sealed you now. That's why rooms feel lighter when you enter, why sleep comes easier, why your spirit feels like it's finally breathing again. The covering is active, the chain is broken, the spell is reversed. And every demon that once studied your bloodline now knows you are not to be touched. You didn't just survive the betrayal, you sanctified the bloodline by facing what everyone else avoided. But chosen one, this makes you a target of a different kind. You carry proof that freedom is possible, and for some, that's inspiring. For others, it's enraging. Your presence will continue to agitate what is unhealed in others. Let it. That's not your burden. That's your badge. You're walking into your next season marked by protection, but also purpose. You didn't go through all this just to breathe easier. You went through this to speak clearer, to warn others, to guide them through the shadows you once mistook for love. Your testimony is a map. Don't hide it. Use it. Because there are others just like you, still sleeping next to betrayal, still doubting their dreams, still wearing necklaces they never questioned. They need your voice. They need your light.
If you have come this far, it is crucial that you watch this next video here. But be warned, it is not for the faint of heart, for only the true chosen ones can handle this video. If you would like to also donate to help keep the channel going, our Buy Me a Coffee link will be in the description.